All right, welcome back, hot dogs and donuts. It's your boy Spider Pig, aka TWPZ, aka Mr. Team DWC. Y'all already know we back with some more entertainment reviews. We did that Gundam Death Scythe video the other day, which for those that haven't seen it, I suggest you go back and see it. But for the people that did see it, you already know y'all like, well, those are good specs on the Death Scythe. But my favorite Gundam was Wing Zero. Where's the Wing Zero video at? Popcorn, we know you might have fucked with Death Scythe more than Wing Zero, but I'm gonna follow it up with Wing Zero being next. 'Cause, he wasn't my favorite, but hell, I'll come back and double tap one time. You dig? It's like killing zombies. Somebody's got to do it. So, I will get right to it. Yeah, blow it up. Let's go.
After Colony 175, after having developed the Tallgeese for Oz, several of the engineers who worked on it decided to defect. And now, they began work on a mobile suit to fight against Oz. Designed with absolutely no regard for money or even pilot safety, they only had one guiding principle for this new machine: make it as powerful as possible in every single regard. And the end result of their tireless work was the Wing Gundam Zero, the grandfather of every Gundam in the After Colony era. And the name itself was also taken from some of those cutting-edge features that made the Wing Zero what it was. For the best defensive capabilities, it used the then brand new Gundanium alloy, a special armor material that could only be manufactured in space and was extremely durable and heat resistant, in addition to also having stealth properties. The obvious downside then was that it was expensive to make, making it unfit for mass production. But perfect for a single powerful machine. For the best mobility then, it got several powerful thrusters and a set of wing binders on the back. These gave the machine a lot of agility, despite its heavy weaponry, and it could also transform into Neo Bird mode for faster travel. And in this mode, its thrust even succeeded that of the Tallgeese, making it the fastest mobile suit around. For its weaponry then, it came outfitted with 2 beam sabers stored in the shoulder armor, 2 large caliber machine cannons on the shoulders, and then its 2 signature weapons were the twin buster rifle and the shield. In addition to acting as a piece of defensive equipment, the shield also acted for the nose cone of the Neo Bird mode, and it also had several offensive capabilities as well. Because it was made out of Gundanium alloy, it was more than powerful enough to strike enemies with, and it could even extend a bit like a pile bunker, to give it just that little bit extra punch. And for good measure, it also had a pair of wing Vulcans mounted on its sides. Although, according to some sources, the wing Vulcans are mounted on the wings, which would also make sense considering their name. But there are also other sources that list their location as unknown. So I say, why not both? This machine is meant to be ridiculously powerful after all. And for extra defensive capabilities, it also had an anti-beam coating and a dedicated heat dissipation system to make it even more indestructible. The main weapon then was that twin buster rifle, an extremely powerful twin-barreled beam cannon that can rightfully be called the most powerful weapon of the entire After Colony universe. At maximum power, it could easily wipe out a colony, and thanks to the fact that it was directly linked to the Wing Zero's powerful reactor, it could also be fired a lot. It could also fire weaker rapid shots, and one of its signature moves was to split the rifle in two, fire a continuous beam in opposite directions, and spin around to deal a large amount of damage to enemies all over the battlefield. And when in Neo Bird mode, the rifle was also split in two.
I'm just saying, Wing Zero a beast. I mean, it is a great fucking Gundam. Shouts out to the Mobile Suit Gundam fans. Y'all know it's been a long time coming. I don't know how I ignored them for so long, but it's great entertainment for me on a Thursday. Fire in the hole.
And mounted on either side of the shield. And yes, it was still usable. The only downside of this incredibly powerful weapon was that it was of course also very big and therefore less maneuverable when compared to a more standard sized beam rifle. But this still wasn't everything that the Wing Zero had to offer, because its electronics were also top notch. Its head was filled to the brim with high-performance sensors and antennas, and on its chest, it had the so-called Search Eye, a dedicated data gathering system that focused on visual and radio wave data. Understandably though, all of this made the Wing Zero a very difficult machine to pilot. And this then brings us to the final piece of its name, the Zero System, or the Zoning and Emotional Range Omitted System in full. No matter how powerful the mobile suit, it still had one problem. The pilot was a human. So in order to fix this, the engineers came up with a new computer system that would allow the pilot to achieve perfect victory. How it works is that it gathers every bit of information from the sensors, analyzes it, and then formulates a number of responses to the situation at hand. This sounds simple and straightforward enough, but there were a number of problems. The first is that this massive amount of data is fed directly into the pilot's brain, something that by itself could already cause a serious data overload, driving the pilot crazy. The other problem was that the Zero system was both brutally honest and prioritized solutions that dealt the maximum amount of damage. Morals, allies, and even pilot safety be damned. For example, if the system thought that the pilot wasn't strong enough to get out of a certain predicament, it had no problems urging the pilot to push the self-destruct button, instead of, using its strong thrusters to get the hell out of there and fight another day.
I'll say it again. Press the button.
So, unless the pilot wanted to be controlled by the system, he also needed a very strong willpower to choose the options that they wanted. Another fun detail is that the system can scan a pilot's brain and control their neurotransmitters. This lessened the burden on their mind and then allowed them to perform at superhuman levels. Meaning that despite all of its drawbacks, the effectiveness was undeniable, and for a machine as complex as the Wing Zero, it was even required, with the cockpit being custom-made to accommodate the system. The real problem though, at least back in the day, lay somewhere else. The Wing Zero was too good. On the one hand, the scientists were afraid of what would happen if the machine fell into the wrong hands. And on the other hand, the technology required to build this monstrosity simply wasn't there yet. So instead of building the Wing Zero, the 5 scientists each went their own way and built their own simplified Gundam that was then meant to participate in Operation Meteor, a plan made by rebels in the colonies to fight back against the oppressive Earth Alliance. Master O built a Shenlong, a Gundam focusing on agility. Instructor H built a Sandrock, a Gundam focusing on heavy armor and advanced communication capabilities, making it a great commander unit. Dr. S built the Heavy Arms, a Gundam focusing on heavy weaponry. Professor G built the Death Scythe, a Gundam specializing in stealth attacks. And finally, Dr. J made the Wing Gundam, the Gundam that was the closest to the original Wing Zero in both name and design. it could quite literally be called a simplified version of the Wing Zero that was made to accommodate the technology of the time and wasn't actively trying to brainwash the pilot. For example, it no longer had the Zero system, but many other systems were carried over. It could still transform into Neo Bird mode for long distance travel, it had a search eye on the chest, and its main weapon was the Buster Rifle, a downsized version of the Zero's Twin Buster Rifle. But despite now only having a single barrel, and therefore less than half the power, it was still plenty devastating enough. The power of a single shot was enough to power a medium-sized city for an entire day, and it had an incredibly wide kill range. It created a violent plasma vortex with a diameter of 150 meters and scorching heat waves that extended for tens of kilometers. If this thing fires in your vicinity, you're going to die one way or another. The big downside, though, was that the gun was now cartridge-fed, rather than being powered by the Wing Gundam's generator. The gun itself houses 3 cartridges, giving it 3 shots, and in some depictions, it could also house 3 spare cartridges on each arm, giving it a total of 9 shots. The upside about this was that this weapon could now also be used by any other mobile suit as well. And in the Glory of the Losers manga, this already powerful weapon became even more powerful, thanks to the Dried Zwerg. This weapon was originally developed as part of the Zero's arsenal, but just like the Zero, it wasn't originally built. That is, until the Wing Gundam's pilot Hiro Yui came across the data and recreated it. The Dried Zwerg consists of 3 identical Messer Zwerg components, which can each act as their own weapon. But the real power of these things is in combination with the Buster Rifle, and when combined, it becomes the Dried Zwerg Buster. There is one problem though. The originals were meant to be made out of Gundanium alloy, and the replicas made by Hiro were not made out of Gundanium alloy. So when firing at full power, they can't handle the output and break down after just 1 shot. And later on, when Hiro got his hands on the Wing Zero, he would also attach the Dried Zwerg to the Twin Buster Rifle. And for the final battle, he even attached 2 sets of Dried Zwerg to it, resulting in a configuration known as the Dried Zwerg Buster Doppelt, with Doppelt meaning doubled in German. And Dried Zwerg is German for 3 dwarfs. Its other weapons then consisted of a pair of head-mounted Vulcan guns, a pair of shoulder-mounted machine cannons, and a shield that houses both a beam saber and an extra sensor. And just like the Zero shield, it has an anti-beam coating and is strong enough to be used as a melee weapon. No pile bunker this time though. And in Neo Bird mode, it again acts as the nose cone, and the Buster Rifle is attached to it. The cockpit then is also quite interesting. While it no longer had the Zero system, it was mounted inside of a sphere that was on a linear frame. It rotated along with the head, and it also had a shock absorber, which was something that the Oz mobile suits didn't have, but could desperately use. And the Wing Gundam still had some other tricks up its sleeve. It used a dedicated capsule to undergo easier atmospheric re-entry, it had a booster to get back to space, and it had a self-destruct button if either things went south or if the mission said to use it.
Mission accepted.
Unlike the other 4 Gundams though, the Wing Gundam would never get upgraded. But it did get fixed up many times. During its first mission, it got badly damaged in a duel against Oz ace pilot Zex Marquis, also known as the Lightning Count, after which Hiro repaired it by borrowing parts from Duo's dead scythe. Later on, Hiro would again be dueling against Zex when circumstances forced him to self-detonate, destroying every important part of the Wing Gundam. But Zex was not happy at all that their honorable duel had been interrupted by underhanded tactics, so he set out to completely restore the Wing Gundam and even used parts of the Tall Geese to do so. As a result, the Wing Gundam was restored almost completely to its former glory. Hiro instead used the Gundam Heavy Arms because he didn't want to accept Zex's kindness before engaging in a life or death duel with him. Later again, Hiro would use the Wing Gundam to defend the Sang Kingdom from the Romefeller Foundation, and it would get badly damaged during the subsequent Battle of Luxembourg. Here it was abandoned and picked up by the Earthsphere Unified Nation. They patched it up again, but then put it into storage because they didn't have any pilots capable of using it effectively. That is, until Lady Une woke up from her coma and pulled off one of the most mind-bogglingly impossible feats in all of Gundam. So, to set the stage, the unconscious Lady Une and the fixed-up Wing Gundam are on Earth, and Trace Kushinoda is leading his troops in space for the final epic battle. And instead of wanting to fight a long, drawn-out battle that would kill thousands, Trace flies up to the enemy commander, who is Zex by the way, and proposes that the two settle the entire war with a duel. In response, Zex aims their giant space laser at him and prepares to fire. Sensing that her darling Trace is about to be fried, Lady Une wakes up from her coma, runs from the hospital to the hangar where the Wing Gundam is stored, gets it ready for takeoff, blasts off into space, and manages to be just in time to push Trace out of the way of said giant space laser. Either Lady Une has the ability to warp time, or Zex has a really slow trigger finger. But this was truly the end for the Wing Gundam. In the TV series, it was never seen again, and apparently in the novel version, it was fixed up yet again, and this time became a peace memorial along with the other 4 Gundams. The Wing Gundam itself then would never get any variants, but it did get a redesign that is typically known as the Wing Gundam Endless Waltz version, because this design was made to bring it more in line with those designs that appeared during the Endless Waltz movie, and later on, it would also be used in the Glory of the Losers manga. So technically speaking, the Endless Waltz version and the TV version are the same thing. They just look very different, and their armaments also vary quite a bit. It no longer has the head-mounted Vulcan guns, and the machine cannons are identical to the ones used by the Wing Zero. And this is also the version that used those spare cartridges for the Buster Rifle and the Dried Zwerg. But none of these changes have an impact on the story. For Hiro's next mobile suit then, we have to go a little bit back to the past to have a look at another Gundam pilot, Quatre Rabarba Winner. In order to get back into space after his missions on Earth, he had to sacrifice his Gundam, the Gundam Sandrock. And then when he got back to space, things would go from bad to worse. To keep a very long story short, he saw how his father was killed by the colonies that he was fighting so hard to protect, and he was absolutely powerless to stop them. This caused Quatre to snap, and instead of protecting the colonies, he now wanted nothing more than revenge against them. But he had no mobile suit to carry out this revenge. Fortunately for him though, he found the plans for the Wing Gundam Zero. And he could actually turn them into reality at this time with the vast resources of the Winner family. The completed Zero system didn't do Catra's already diminished mental state any good, and he completely lost it. He went on a murderous rampage that wouldn't be stopped until fellow Gundam pilots Hiro and Trowa intervened, and fortunately were able to bring Catra back to reality. This did have one giant negative consequence though. At the time, both Hiro and Trowa were working for Oz. Trowa had gone undercover and Hiro was a captive. So now, both Catra and the powerful Wing Zero also fell into Oz's hands. That is, until Hiro and Catra escaped to Earth and Zex would claim the Zero for himself. A few trials and tribulations later then, and Hiro would receive the Epion from Trace, which was a close combat Gundam that had its own version of the Zero system. And he would then use this machine to fight against Zex again, who now had the Wing Zero. The duel would end in yet another draw, but this time it was because both pilots were so exhausted from the mental strain caused by their respective Zero systems. Also, at the end of this duel, they decided to trade mobile suits, finally establishing Hiro as the pilot of the Wing Zero. But down the line, he would also lend the Wing Zero to Wu-Fei and Trowa. Because dangerous as it was, the Zero system had certain, let's call them therapeutic qualities. Wu-Fei was unsure of who his true enemy was, and he had lost his way because of this. And apparently, the Zero system was also very capable of telling someone who their true enemy was. And for Wu-Fei, this was Trace Kushonada. As for Trowa, he had lost his memories, and by using the Zero system, all of those lost memories returned to him. So the Wing Zero definitely got around. And of course, Hiro would use this machine to duel against Zex again.
Why don't you kill me? Relina would be sad.
Later on during the Eve Wars then, we see a very different looking Wing Zero, but this isn't actually a different version. It's just meant to be the same old Wing Zero, but now redesigned by Hajime Katoki. Apparently, the fangirls weren't a huge fan of the Wing Zero's original wings and complained that they were too bug-like. So Katoki redesigned them to be more angelic. And it was then called things like the Wing Zero Custom or the Wing Zero Endless Waltz version to avoid confusion with the TV version. Or at least, this is how it was originally. We'll dive into that rabbit hole in a second. But first, we have to look at some other variants of it. They might not be very canonical, but from the Gundam Combat card game, we get some interesting looking variants of the TV version. The Forest Camo Wing Zero is a very serious looking machine that combines heavier armor with extra Gatling guns on the backpack and some interesting weapons. On the card itself, it says that this version of the Wing Zero comes equipped with a high output Buster rifle, which also has immense power. Meanwhile, over on Twitter, the designer of this variant says that it uses an EMP gun, because its main intended area of combat is a forest, where shell-firing weapons, or especially beam weapons, could easily cause a forest fire. Also, the vents on the shoulder armor can disperse a smokescreen. The Wing Zero high mobility type then takes the Wing Zero's already high mobility and turns it to 11 by giving it larger thrusters and more aerodynamic armor. The twin Buster rifle has also been drastically changed, and I feel like the overall design takes a lot of clues from the Gundam X Gundams. It overall feels very Gundam Air Mastery, and the twin Buster rifle now reminds me of the B machine gun from the Gundam X Divider. And finally, there was the Wing Zero underwater type. This thing also got a very different twin buster rifle and another armor overhaul. Instead of transforming into Neo Bird mode, it now transformed into Submarine mode, which I think is a really missed opportunity to call it something like the Neo Dolphin mode or like the Neo Fish mode. But anyways, other cool details are that it now has swimming goggles to probably protect its eyes from the pressure, a new shield that looks like it has torpedo tubes, and the backpack has been completely changed, of course, for that new transformation. Our second set of variants then comes to us from the TL's Impulse manga. Here we are first introduced to the Gundam Lucifer, a unit built by the Romefeller Foundation that was mostly identical to that Endless Waltz version of the Wing Zero. It had a different color scheme and it carried no weapons because it was made to test out a new version of the Zero system. The Zero system version 2.0. Simply put, it was an even more powerful version, which then also led to more powerful side effects. The suggestions that it gave were even more extreme, and it was even harder for the pilot to ignore these suggestions and choose their own path. It pretty much brainwashed the pilot into following its orders. And things really went awry when the test pilot asked the system how peace on Earth could be achieved. The system's answer? Kill all humans. Which, I mean, it kinda has a point, but it's also not completely right. The data of this machine then seems to have been used in the development of the Wing Gundam Seraphim. Rather than a balls-to-the-wall machine, the Romefeller Foundation wanted to create a mass production version of the Wing Zero, which could also be used by regular soldiers. We don't know how many things were changed performance-wise, but on the outside, things remained largely the same. The color scheme has been slightly changed, with the biggest changes being that the main wings are now located on the side skirts and are retractable, and that it now only comes outfitted with half of the twin buster rifle, making it just a buster rifle, and also effectively having the power of the Seraphim. On the inside, meanwhile, it had the Zero system version 2.5. This also aimed to be an improvement of the Zero system, but with less of the drawbacks, and it mostly succeeded in doing this, although it would still occasionally take control of the mobile suit. And now it's time to have a look at the glory of the Losers timeline, because in this manga retelling of the Gundam Wing anime, the TV version of the Wing Zero and the Endless Waltz version of the Wing Zero are treated as two different mobile suits, and as such, the events surrounding them have also been slightly modified. The origins of the Wing Zero are still largely identical, but instead of being called the Wing Zero, it's now called the Proto Zero. And because Katoki designed the thing, there is also some extra Katoki flair added to that Proto Zero. The first major difference that we encounter then is when Oz got their hands on the thing. An Oz officer decided to use the Zero, but got overwhelmed by the Zero system. In the TV version, he is killed by Duo, while leaving the Wing Zero mostly intact, but in Glory of the Losers, the Zero system decided that Tran's best course of action was to pull a hero, and he did. Tran was foobar, but fortunately the Proto Zero was only badly damaged, and it, along with another badly damaged mobile suit, the Tallgeese Flugel, were recovered by Howard, who then mashed both of them together, resulting in the Wing Zero. But despite looking identical at first glance, there are a few differences between the Wing Zero from the Endless Waltz OVA and the Wing Zero from the Glory of the Losers manga. The first difference is that the cockpit is now located in the chest rather than in the abdomen. The second difference is that the ears open up and the cockpit hatch changes positions when the Zero system is activated, and the third and final difference is that it now has a shield. As a consequence, the glory of the loser's version can transform into Neo Bird mode. And unlike the TV version, it has a dedicated Neo Bird mode for space and another dedicated one for Earth. The difference between the two being how the wings were deployed. And talking about the wings, these had some cool gimmicks other than just looking pretty too. They can close into an atmospheric entry mode, they can function as a shield, and thanks to their special structure, they can also be used to dissipate heat, which is visually represented by feathers flying around. A final lore difference then between the Endless Walls version and the TV version is the so-called Zero frame. Unlike the Oz mobile suits, the Wing Zero's armor and frame were completely separate, so it could keep on fighting even if over 90% of its armor had been damaged. And this self-contained frame was also extremely nimble, giving it the same range of movement as a human. What I find interesting though is that this separation of armor and frame is described as like an upgrade and an advantage, whereas in the Universal Century, we see the exact opposite happening with the movable frame. There, the idea was to combine the armor and the frame to make the mobile suit significantly lighter. But anyways, the final Wing Zero variants come from the controversial Frozen Teardrop novels. First up, the Wing Zero's backstory was slightly changed. As stated earlier, originally when the Wing Zero was designed, it wasn't built, because the technology required to build it simply wasn't there yet. But according to Frozen Teardrop, this didn't stop them from trying to build one with that incomplete technology. As a result, it had a wonky, rudimentary Zero system and no twin Buster rifle. This incomplete Zero then would be used by Hiro's father, Odin Lowe. Much later in the timeline then, Catra, now going by Instructor W, and Troa, now going by Dr. T, decided to build 4 new mobile suits: the Warlock, the Prometheus, the Scheherazade, and the Snow White. But this was easier said than done because of the new pacifism laws. Total pacifism was now the norm, and all data concerning mobile suits had been lost. But then the former Gundam pilots had a lucky break. They found abandoned mobile suits made out of Gundanium alloy that were built sometime in between the Wing Zero and the 5 Gundams that we're all familiar with. And on top of that, these machines supposedly participated in the Second Lunar War, a conflict that took place at an unspecified time before the events of the Gundam Wing anime. So, having recovered these machines, they set about upgrading them with modern technology. One interesting thing though is that apparently in the novel they are never referred to as Gundams, despite their developers modeling them after Gundams and the fact that they are made out of Gundanium alloy. And in the case of the Snow White, it's even said to be almost identical to the Proto Zero, minus a more white color scheme, hence the name. Bigger differences though can be found in the weapons. It's described as having a beam saber and a new Buster rifle that uses 3 cartridges, making it sound similar to the Buster rifle of the Wing Gundam. And the Snow White 2 can carry 3 spare cartridges. But the real power of this weapon again comes from a special attachment, the Siebenzwerg, German for 7 dwarfs. And these 7 dwarfs can fire 7 differently colored beams, each with their own special effect. Red is super hot, blue is super cold, which can then be made stronger by firing it together with the red, black creates tornadoes, white shoots out lightning strikes, green creates a flash that causes green beams to rain down, which then transform into vines that tie enemy mobile suits to the ground. Silver are pretty much armor-piercing rounds and can penetrate even Gundanium alloy, and gold is an EMP. And the mobile suit itself had some other cool abilities as well. It's so maneuverable that it could easily shake off missiles, it can leave after images, it's got a stealth cloak, And it's got a zero system that can be turned off. A truly revolutionary feature. And then the prototype for this machine was set to be the Snow White Prelude. Another maybe Gundam that looked even more like the Wing Zero. But again, it was more white and the weapons were slightly different. Or, well, in the case of the Prelude, it's the weapon attachments that were slightly different. Because the Prelude still had the Twin Buster Rifle, but instead of the Messerzwerg, it had the Neuzwerg, which were just upgraded Messerzwergs. 3 Neuzwergs still made a Dreidzwerg, and equipping 2 of those Dreidzwergs to the Twin Buster Rifle still turned it into the Dreidzwerg Buster Doppelt. The main difference though is that they could now also be attached to the shield to turn it into the Shieldzwerg. And when not in use, they could be stored onto the other main difference with the standard Wing Zero, the Seraphim binders. The main wings were still the same, but they now also had an extra set of wings that were mounted on the back skirt. These could store the Neuzwergs, and together with the main wings, they could be deployed in 2 modes. Rondo, where they're placed defensively in front of the Prelude, or Anthem, where they are placed more aggressively behind the Prelude. And then there was also the Black Wing, which was a black version of the Wing Zero that also had bat-like wings. The machine could either be controlled by a pilot or by the Zero system without a pilot. And then finally, to wrap up this video, there's also 2 completely non-canonical versions of the Wing Zero that I quickly want to mention. In SD Gundam G Generation Cross Drive, the main character gets an almost identical Wing Zero custom, but she has her own specialized combat support system that can be used in combination with the Zero system to make it even more powerful. And this unit was simply known as the Wing Gundam Zero Nikea Custom. And the second machine is the Wing Gundam Zero Rebellion from Super Robot Wars DD. The only real difference with the standard version was the coloring, and it was now used by Lelouch from Code Geass. I also love how they made it, by the way. Because the Black Knights didn't have the means to make it themselves, they leaked the plans to Britannia, kinda coaxed them into building it, and then stole it once it was complete. And that was it for the Wing Zero's development history. Which then leaves us with the age-old question. Do you prefer the TV version of the Wing Zero or the Endless Waltz version? Feel free to discuss in the comments, and while you're there, do consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. The Zero system told me that's the best course of action for you to take right now. As always, a big thank you to the Patreon supporters.
Big thank you to the Patreon supporters. Big thank you to the Dubby. Y'all know to go get y'all some Dubby. Shout out to the link. It'll probably be in the comments. Especially on YouTube. Now, Rumble, I ain't worried about advertising over there. Y'all ain't got time for that. The actual ads over there. So, you know, it is what it is. I guess that just decided not to pop up. But there it is.